It is my great pleasure to introduce Ellen McCurley, a graduate of our MSW and MPH programs at Boston University. She embodies social work. She's a clinician locally as well as a founder of the Pendulum Project, a nonprofit humanitarian organization that helps families and communities care for, support, and protect orphans and vulnerable children in Malawi, Africa, hard hit by AIDS. With offices in both the U.S. and Malawi, the Pendulum Project provides frontline, hands-on, tangible resources, small grants, personnel support, training, basic technology, and medical supplies that give orphaned and vulnerable children a fighting chance to overcome the devastating effects of this pandemic. The work of the Pendulum Project is based on the conviction that what the caregivers in Malawi need are partners in hope, advocacy, and resource procurement. For example, supported programs offer basics such as food and soap to children. They help teach children to deal with grief and provide help to the grandmothers who are caring for as many as 30 children. Other examples of the Pendulum Project's work include the awarding of a grant for a village man to start an orphan care center. And since high school is not free in Malawi, the Pendulum Project helps pay tuition for teenagers. These are but a few examples of the work that Ellen McCurley has done. It has been said of her that she embodies compassion in action. We are so very proud and honored to have her here today to address the class of 2009.
Wow, thanks so much, Gail. That was amazing. Dean Steckity, faculty members, staff, and friends, and most importantly to you graduates, I'd like to say this is really a great honor for me to be here to speak to you all. And secondly, I'm really, really happy for you all. I was here in 2005, sitting right where you are, and I was so relieved. I was so happy to not have to go to courseware or, pick up my highlighters, and it was just a really happy day. And as Esther said, it is a time to just go with the moment and enjoy and savor. Kate Solomon asked me actually 2 years ago to be your commencement speaker, and I was really excited and nervous, but I had a really good excuse not to be here, which is my daughter was graduating on the same day from college. And then Kate called me again and asked me to speak this year, and I said, oh my goodness, again? And she said, yeah, and I said, well, what should I talk to the students about? And she said, well, tell them your story. And so I'm hoping that my story and the work that I do as a public health social worker, both here and in Africa, will be helpful to you as you all journey on to use yourself and your skills and your training to help others. It's really great to be back here at BU. This was a really supportive place for me, and it's great to be here where I'm talking to people who get it. I'm surrounded by good souls, fellow comrades, who believe in social justice, who believe in individual health and wellness. Many commencement dresses are given with the intent to inspire graduates to give back, to urge them to be instruments of change, and to understand why you do that and what the benefits are. Well, with this group, I don't have to do that, but I am here to give you some knowledge about what I've kind of learned. You graduates are part of a special community. You're part of a group of people who really are concerned about putting compassion into action to alleviate human suffering. You're trained to look at the person and the environment. You start with people's strengths, and you really believe in hope and transformation against all odds. As you know, social workers do this in a lot of different ways. Some of them are counselors, they're researchers, they're policymakers, they're educators, they're advocates, and they lead programs and organizations in a variety of different settings. I've worn a lot of these hats, and I can tell you that I've really enjoyed the versatility and the challenges of doing both macro and micro social work. I imagine that many of you arrived here with different reasons for coming. You come with different experiences and backgrounds, and some of you may not know exactly what you're doing next. But I can tell you that BU has really well prepared you to do many great things. I've learned that to do this kind of work well, you need to be passionate, you need to be curious, and you need to be self-reflective. You have to love working with all kinds of types of people. You need to surround yourself with really supportive people, and I highly recommend good supervision. A sense of humor is really helpful, and as you've learned from everybody else that's talked here previously, you have to take really good care of yourself. I found that my iPod has been a really good friend on airport layovers and in tackling large amounts of paperwork and writing. I highly recommend physical exercise and meditation and anything else that can help you relax and recharge and refresh. Out in the field, you're going to encounter a lot of ethical issues, working in different places and with different systems. You'll be operating in an environment that is constantly changing due to social, economic, and political factors that are playing out here in communities, on the national level, and even globally. You know, these present both challenges and opportunities that will entail you to be creative and also to persevere. To me, social work is really a spiritual vocation. It's a privilege to bear witness to people's lives, to hear their stories and experiences. You get the honor of peering into the human soul. It's something that you're practicing constantly and looking and examining yourself. It's really science and art. And social work exposes you to cultural, religious, indigenous beliefs, and it makes you aware of the role that these and other structural factors have in communities and also on individuals. The work you do is confronting, it's not boring, it's gonna make you laugh, it'll make you cry, and you'll find yourself in some very weird and wonderful situations. I'll give you one example. I think it was about 8 years ago, I was in Malawi and I visited a rural village almost out on the Mozambique border. For those of you that don't know, Malawi is in Central Africa, and it is a landlocked country, and to the north of it is Tanzania, and to the east of it is Zambia, and to the west is Mozambique. And I was out in a rural area, and I got in my car and started to drive away, and all of a sudden, there was a rooster sitting next to me flapping around. And, you know, I wanted to throw it out the window, and a couple of the people in the back seat said, "No, you can't do that. That's a gift. That's to thank you for what we do and what you're doing." So that's just one example of kind of some of the wacky things that have happened to me. And along the way, you're going to meet some really amazing people who will keep you going, who will, you know, continue to spur you on despite being tired or even doubtful. Like you, I came to BU to gain knowledge and practical experience in the dual degree program. I chose social work because I really embraced its core principles, values, and approach. And as I tell you a little bit about myself, you'll kind of see that it became a natural step, you know, to end up here. My life has really been one of privilege and material comfort. My childhood was challenging due to my mother's lifelong struggle with chronic mental illness. I was raised by various extended family members, and I moved around a lot due to my mother and father's absence. I never worried about food or shelter or getting an education, but I did experience times of sadness and confusion, and feeling powerless as I watched my mother move from one inpatient psychiatric hospital to another to get better. I learned about the stigma and the misunderstanding surrounding mental illness and how obstacles exist for people in accessing adequate care and support. By witnessing my mother's experience, I came to realize that healthcare is a human rights issue. Through her, I learned a lot about the human condition and one's path towards healing and wholeness. In her case, I saw the power that a therapeutic relationship coupled with social supports and services can bring in facilitating wellness and resiliency. Another reason why I probably ended up as a social worker is the education I received at a progressive Catholic girls' school in New York City called the Convent of the Sacred Heart. Believe it or not, the Hilton girls went there. So you may not think a Catholic school can be a hip place, but indeed it was a very interesting learning environment. The school was run by smart nuns who embraced the principles of liberation theology. They actualized it through their community service activities in Harlem and in the Bronx, and their larger advocacy work on behalf of the poor and disenfranchised in third world countries. For those of you that don't know, liberation theology emphasizes the Christian mission of bringing justice to the poor and oppressed, particularly through political and social activism. I hope you'll notice that it sounds a lot like the professional code of ethics and principles of professional social work. Their teaching and example really impacted me. These sisters were cool, they were funny, educated, worldly, and outspoken. They showed me how people can come together out of compassion to serve others. I learned that I wasn't cut out to be a nun, but the sisters definitely rubbed off on me. And on many occasions while I've been working in Africa, local people have asked me if I'm a nun or if I'm a missionary. And I can tell you that even this background has been really helpful because when I am working overseas, a lot of the groups we work with are faith-based. During my 20s and 30s, I was busy building a career in advertising and marketing while raising 2 children. I gathered a lot of business and people skills. I worked with a variety of large Fortune 500 corporations. I co-founded a very successful advertising agency where we gained recognition for our creative work, and we became a really great place that people wanted to come and work. I managed a large staff, I made good money, and I learned how to grow a business. I did a lot of volunteer work, as well as provided creative pro bono work for many nonprofits, and I found this really interesting and really rewarding. It was there that I learned how to use public health campaigns focused on issues like HIV/AIDS, child abuse, neglect, and poverty to promote health and to rally people to get involved in those causes. I really learned that you can combine art, technology, music, drama, and media as outreach mechanisms. I was still working in marketing 9 years ago when I went to Malawi, and it was there that I went to make a documentary about the AIDS pandemic. This turned out to be a life-changing experience, and at the time I was doing volunteer work for a Boston-based HIV/AIDS organization. They had been asked by the government of Malawi at the 2000 International AIDS Conference in Durban, South Africa, to rally infectious disease doctors, activists, donors, and development specialists to help, complete their strategic framework to battle HIV/AIDS. When I was working with this group, we thought it would be a great idea if we could put together a video that they could use to gain support and assistance from the international community, and particularly when they got in front of people at the UN and people at the Global Fund, which had just started for HIV/AIDS, TB, and malaria. At the time, I knew Malawi was facing escalating rates of HIV prevalence. It was considered by many to be a failed state because of its poor economy, its broken health and education infrastructure and its huge dependence, almost 65% on foreign aid. It had one of the highest rates of maternal and child mortality in the world, with 49% of children under 12 years stunted due to malnourishment. What I did was I rounded up a lot of support, I donated money, and I put together a documentary film crew. And we went there, and in 10 days, we produced a documentary. Before I went there, I kind of braced myself. I knew that, there was a major pandemic raging in Africa. And I knew that the majority of Africans were struggling each day just to eat and survive, and that thousands were dying each day from preventable diseases. When I got to Malawi, I saw unbelievable poverty and disease. There were tens of thousands of children orphaned and vulnerable because their mothers and their fathers and family members had all succumbed to the virus. Many children were also infected at the time. I met grandmothers who were taking care of numerous children with little income to pay for their food, their school fees, or medical care. I met one young man in his 20s who told me that he had already been to over 150 funerals. I went into people's homes in the city and in rural areas, and I saw people living on leaves, drinking dirty water, with little clothes and no blankets. I went to the main public hospital in Lilongwe, which is the capital city of Malawi. Actually, Bono talks about this place a lot. And what I saw was a hospital full of adults and children crowded into beds, sick from opportunistic infections caused by AIDS, and also struggling with other diseases like malaria and tuberculosis. I saw caregivers sleeping under the beds in these crowded wards and rundown hospitals. I met fatigued and really underpaid health workers working in these really unsafe and just unbelievably deplorable conditions. They hardly had any medicines or equipment, and at the time, there was no antiretroviral treatment. Many of them used plastic bags as gloves, and many told me they were looking to leave the country and work overseas. What I saw everywhere was a country with little resources and a fragile healthcare system, and now overwhelmed by AIDS. More amazing, though, were the people that I met who were mobilizing themselves out of hope and compassion by forming community-based organizations to tend to the sick and the destitute in their villages. I met volunteer home-based care workers going hut to hut to lend psychosocial care and support, and doing this with really no tools or training. In essence, they were social workers. They knew that the extended family, which had always been the traditional safety net, was now under great stress. Many told me that they felt compelled to respond, but they lacked resources and knowledge. They wanted to provide effective prevention and treatment for those infected and affected by the virus, as well as address other pervasive issues like child abuse and neglect and domestic violence. What I saw, though, was very little aid trickling down to the ground to build the capacity and programming of these indigenous groups. I didn't see much evidence that sustainable development had been effective. 2/3 of the population in Malawi live on $2 a day or under. And they also are a country that has some of the worst health indicators in the world. I realized that the majority of Malawians were living in absolute stupid poverty, suffering and dying needlessly, while I and so many Americans had so much, almost in fact too much abundance. And yet, these people had something that I and so many here in the developed world with money, material possessions, and many other comforts lack, and that is a deep spirituality and a sense of interconnectedness with each other and the natural world. I felt blessed to bear witness to these people, and in the midst of their unimaginable struggle and oppression, they really exuded joy and love. I was angry and ashamed at the injustice I saw. I was confronted with my own unique privilege and status as a white middle-class woman living in the richest country in the world while others were suffering so much. I felt rattled, I felt raw, and yet I felt really alive. I felt very clear. Paul Tillich kind of calls this a moment of grace. He says that grace strikes us when we are in great pain and restlessness. It strikes us when we walk through the dark valley of a meaningless and empty life. It strikes us when we feel that our separation is deeper than usual because we have violated another life, a life which we loved or from which we were estranged. My experience there was beyond words. I only remember that my heart was bursting, and I felt both a sorrow and a love and a real fullness of being. I knew that a lot of people were going to have a hard time understanding my experience, and that somehow I knew I was going to make some significant personal and career changes. I also knew that this would cause a lot of upheaval in my family life, and this did prove true. And my choices were particularly difficult for my children, who were young at the time, to understand. It really helped when I brought them over to Africa, though, and they could better understand what I had seen, what my experience has been over the many years, and why I made the choices I did. My two children now, one's 21, the other one's 23, have actually told me that they really thought that what I'd done and what I had decided to do really positively impacted them, and I've been really thankful for their continued support. Well, after coming back to Malawi, I used the documentary and spoke to a lot of groups and businesses to create awareness. And one of the things that I decided to do was to come back to Boston University. I had actually started my MSW a couple of years earlier, and then I had stopped it to go back into the business world. And while I was walking around here, I ran into Betty Ruth, and she talked me into getting an MPH, and I decided to do that, and it was a really good decision. Betty Ruth is very persuasive. Subsequently, I also met two women at a conference on the AIDS pandemic in 2001 at the Kennedy School of Government. And we came together and we decided to form a nonprofit called the Pendulum Project. And our mission was really to focus on delivering advocacy and resources to these grassroots groups that we had seen all over sub-Saharan Africa, with a focus on, orphan and vulnerable children and their caregivers. We did this because we really saw these groups as not only essential in improving health and well-being, but as key players in delivering holistic interventions that are practical, culturally appropriate, and really, we hope, sustainable. We felt strongly that these groups should be self-managed and created because the people there instinctively know what to do. We were determined to put the power into the hands of the people working on the front lines as responders and community builders. We wanted to create an organization where all kinds of people here in the US and globally could get involved and donate their skills, their talents, and goodwill. We envisioned Pendulum as an organization that was about social justice and not about charity. We wanted to show people that Africa is not a hopeless situation, despite alarming statistics, rampant corruption, and poverty, as well as really difficult logistical problems. We wanted to give voice to the many people who we had met, who were working on the ground, as well as to those that they serve. We gained a lot of momentum, and it also helped that other people started to kind of jump on the bandwagon. People like Bono, the One Organization, and Jeff Sachs. It really, really helped us, gain steam. Over the last 9 years, Pendulum's raised about $1 million in grants and resources that we've given to community-based initiatives. We're now a registered non-governmental organization in Malawi, and we have a really good-sized team. I've worked my way out of a paid job. I'm now a volunteer, and I head the board here, and I go back and forth. What I've seen is a lot of success, and I've seen that you can't just focus on short-term crisis, but you've got to look at, large-term problems. Our community partners, deliver a lot of programs. They pay for school fees, they use drama for public health prevention, they create communal gardens, they run support and counseling groups, they run feeding and literacy programs and orphan care centers. Our grants have been used to strengthen their organizational capacity, to buy bicycles, ambulance bicycles, home-based care health kits, to provide stipends and training for these workers. Our local team evaluates and monitors these grants and programs and works closely with them to build their knowledge and practice, and also to connect them with other key providers and donors. I've been traveling back and forth to Malawi over the last 9 years. I just got back about 3 weeks ago. I've seen a lot of change, but there's also a lot of work that needs to be done. I still don't see enough aid getting on the ground, and I go to many conferences where people say the focus has to be on building grassroots solutions. Over the years, I've learned that to effectively address serious public health issues, you also have to understand underlying structural factors. By that, I mean the political, the social, and the economic context. You need to use research, both quantitative and qualitative, to inform your work. You need to really be out in the field. You need to stay close to the people and close to the issues. And it's really where I find the most enjoyment. I've seen the limitations in affecting behavior change and increasing health and well-being by only using Western-based biomedical approaches. The most successful projects I've seen are done by Africans or those that know and understand the cultures and realities of doing development and health work in resource-poor settings. I've accumulated a wealth of stories and a lot of wisdom in my global health work. I even received a marriage proposal from a village chief, which I delicately and politely had to turn down. My practical experience working in Africa and growing a nonprofit has also complemented my work here. I work in the North Shore, here in Massachusetts, in an outpatient mental health clinic that serves a very poor and vulnerable population of children and adults. I do individual counseling and group work in my office, and I meet clients in schools or in their homes. I also provide clinical supervision for 2 HIV/AIDS organizations. I also teach courses, and I also have provided training in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, both here and also over in Africa. Although these 2 settings that I work in here and there are very different, I still see many individuals here that are suffering from a lot of the same problems that I see in Africa: poverty, lack of education, and inadequate access to health care and social services. Although there are more resources here, I see many people struggling, and as you can imagine, the climate we're in right now makes it very difficult. My clients here deal with also a lot of pervasive issues that I've been able to look at on the other side, issues like chronic disease, domestic violence, and substance addiction. I'm constantly finding myself comparing the 2 worlds I live in and the populations I work with, and I think it's really helpful in my practice. Working here, I find it challenging. I find that there's a lot of benefits and limitations in using a biomedical model and approach in helping people in becoming healthier and better functioning. As a social worker, I don't think you can just focus on reducing distressing symptoms through medication and treatment. But as social workers, we also need to continue to address the underlying real and systemic problems that cause people suffering. I think there's more emphasis needed and more dedication of resources towards public health prevention, psychosocial education and social services. I'd like to see more community-based programs, jobs, and education for those that are really vulnerable and marginalized. Delivering quality mental health care is very challenging, especially in a managed care system where I think too much emphasis can be placed on productivity and profit. I see many social workers here, healthcare providers and educators who are really good and caring practitioners, but very harried and overworked. I see that many of them are struggling to make a decent living under fee-for-service and in an environment of deep budget cuts. I'm fortunate to work with great colleagues who are really dedicated despite all of these challenges. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I can't leave without telling all of you who are graduating that it's really important that you push for better policies and use of our experience and of our knowledge and our unique view of working with clients and communities so that we can really better serve the poor. I think that despite a lot of the huge social and economic challenges here and globally, you, the class of 2009, are entering the profession at a really wonderful time. It's a time of change and hope. It's been a historical year in the U.S. We have a leader who cares about issues near and dear to us. I can tell you that in my travels, it's really exciting when people say, "You've done well. We're really proud of you Americans." It's exciting to have a president who really kind of talks a lot of our language. He cares about health care, he cares about the poor and disadvantaged, and he cares about education. I mean, this is a huge change. This is a huge opportunity for us. And if anything, this man has shown us that change can happen. He's shown us that as social workers, barriers can be broken and that challenges can be dealt with through intelligence, relationship building, and grassroots involvement. You're entering the social work profession at a really great time when we're also learning a lot about the brain. I think that the next 5, 10, 20 years are going to be really exciting, and there's going to be a lot of data and a lot of tools useful in your work. Unlike many other professions, the employment outlook for social workers is really strong. I can tell you that you're very much needed. You will be appreciated by many. You're going to have some wonderful moments when you really see that you're making a difference. Clients will very much thank you or tell you that their life is getting better or that the programs you work in are really essential in their lives and communities. The payback and experience is immense. You're going to stretch and grow. Your social work degree gives you a lot of ability and a lot of versatility to do a lot of different things. I tell you not to be afraid to try different things, and it's okay to think big. If you keep your heart open and your eyes wide open and you adhere to your principles, you're going to do fine. I hope you have a lot of fun. I send you many blessings. I wish you much happiness. And as they say in Malawi, Zikomo Kwambiri. Thank you very much.